Story 1. Ex-social worker. One young woman immigrated here from a country in Africa. She worked extremely hard, holding 3 jobs so she could help her family members immigrate to the United States, and she managed to get many of them over. Then she started developing mental health symptoms commonly associated with schizophrenia. Her entire family abandoned her at the homeless shelter with nothing. A limited grasp of English, no possessions, no medical paperwork, and she was hallucinating and terrified. Story 2. My sister was assaulted between ages 4 to 16 by my grandfather. She, in turn, assaulted me when I was 6 to 8. She was 3 years older than me, because she had learned that that's what we do to people we love. My grandfather received a 7-year prison sentence and was released after 5 years. But while he was in prison, he sent a letter to us, stamped with the prison seal and sent through their postal office. The letter contained 2 pages. The first was pure text saying how well he had it in prison and that he hoped we could all sit down after he was released to straighten out these misunderstandings and become a family again. The second page was a clip art collection with text in the middle. The clip arts depicted a clock, a lion, and a door. The text in the middle said, "The innocently convicted will serve his punishment, while the liar will have to live with her betrayal for the rest of her life." Since the letter was officially sealed and sent from the prison addressed to my sister, she was the one who opened it, and it caused an instant suicide attempt. Our lawyers were not happy. To add some final context, writing that letter was part of a rehabilitation class. Write a letter to your victim kind of class, and it was meant for inmates to reflect on their crimes. The prison assured us it was never meant to be sent and that a mistake had been made, and they weren't sure why that letter had gone out. Story 3. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I was out playing. I saw a man beating a girl up and dragging her by the hair through stinging nettles. She was crying and they were fighting and arguing. When it stopped, my brother, who was 10 or 11, and I took her back home to my mum. It turns out my mum knew her as she was my dad's best friend's niece. She was a heroin addict and was most likely fighting with her boyfriend at the time over drugs or alcohol. I remember she looked terrible, with a nose bleeding, black eyes, and clumps of hair missing. She left, and I didn't hear from her for a while. Then, my mum told me she died in a neighboring town from a heroin overdose, with the guy who had beaten her. I'm 32 now. I still remember her. I was walking through the graveyard looking for my dad's brother's grave. Different story. He killed himself at 20, and accidentally stumbled across her grave. She was only 23 when she died. Nearly 10 years younger than what I currently am. A lot of my current friends can't believe I've never touched drugs, growing up around them on a council estate in the UK. She was one of the reasons I never touched them, along with another family friend who lived a few doors down. Both died from heroin overdoses when I was a kid, and I'm pretty sure my mum told me about it to shock me away from drugs, and it worked. Story 4. There was a story about a monkey torture ring being shut down recently. They were buying monkeys on the black market and then torturing them to death for money. Paying and profiting to inflict pain and death is probably the best way to seal your soul behind the gates of hell. Story 5. I worked at a charity event on a golf course where I was hired to make cocktails at the 9th hole. Overhearing the vice president of Nestle bragging about hooking people on their products from birth to death. He then said something to the effect of, "If you want to be a powerhouse in business, you have to take pride in your firing. The first thing you should do once you get the right position is to seek out your hero in that company. Then fire him. Always fire your heroes. It feels great and lets people know that you mean business." Just creepy to hear out loud. Story 6. My job is about support and civil claims for victims of child abuse, involving religious organizations enabling sexual abuse against children and doing everything in their power to protect the abusers. It also addresses grooming gangs that targeted children as young as 7 and showed no remorse at all. Story 7. 2 years ago, a girl from my school was assaulted by 3 guys, and it was posted online. One committed suicide and the other 2 fled the country. Most of my school has seen it, and she is living with severe depression and social anxiety. So sad. Story 8. I saw a video of a man who appeared to have some type of fetish who committed suicide by lowering himself in a push-up stance onto a combat knife similar to the one used by Rambo in his garage. Reading the story interview with a nullo was also quite unsettling. Story 9. I've read some of the research reports translated into English of Unit 731. They made the infamous Nazi medical experiments look like children playing doctor behind the bushes. Story 10. Local Rescue has just posted that someone took out 3 kittens and smashed their heads in locally. Some of the things people do to dispose of unwanted young animals is horrible. We had a lad saved from the piano wire technique, where hunters in Spain take unwanted hunting animals and suspend them from ropes around their necks so their back paws just touch the ground, and leave them to suffocate slowly. Story 11. I read this in the newspaper in Osaka in 2010. A mother with 2 kids aged 1 and 3 years old. One day she just packed up and left, leaving the kids locked at home. A few weeks later, there was a bad stench and police climbed in from the balcony and found the decomposing bodies of the babies in the center of the room hugging each other. They said it seemed to look like they were comforting each other before they died of hunger. Neighbors said that about a week before, they heard the babies crying out for their mother, but no one did anything. No one checked. I hate it that I could not unread that. Edit to correct the details that I had forgotten, but was written in the papers. The online newspaper article did not say about them hugging each other, but that was what I remembered from the original printed newspaper. She left them because she wanted to have some free time. Apparently, she had gone back to her house and found the decomposed bodies of her babies, and she left. For more information, please refer to reliable sources or visit the official webpage detailing the Osaka child abandonment case. Story 12. Fathers in poor countries are killing their daughters or killing the mother because she is unable to produce an economically valuable son. Ironically, it is the father's sperm that determines the sex of the baby. Story 13. I had an 11-year-old come into my urgent care for abdominal pain, and I had a weird gut feeling to do a pregnancy test. It was positive, so I had to tell an 11-year-old she was pregnant, and the father was a family member. The family was devout Catholic, so she kept the baby, but the terror and heartbreak I saw in her eyes will stay with me forever. I was never able to follow up. I, of course, reported it to Child Protective Services, but nothing was ever done about it. I have reported so many cases of child abuse to them and have never seen a child taken from their monsters and sad excuses for parents. Working in healthcare is unbearable in general, and I could tell stories for days. Story 14. I work in mental health and have experience working with at-risk youth. It's distressing to see neglectful parents who dropped out of middle school, not even 25 years old with multiple kids, engaging in hard drug use and often staying in drug-infested motels. They were either dishonest or abusive toward their children, fortunately never in my presence. One of the most troubling situations involved children being left at a relative's house, where it was strongly suspected they were being sexually abused, though we had no tangible proof to act on. Story 15. That news story that was on here yesterday about the British crocodile expert who recorded and tortured over 80 puppies and posted it online for other individuals who enjoy watching it. I wasn't able to sleep properly last night because of it, and my faith in humanity lessens every day. Story 16. I watch a lot of true crime. The one that absolutely crushes my soul is understanding there is a part of humanity that genuinely seeks joy in hurting children. And it is even sicker these things are shared online. And there is a community out there who truly enjoys knowing and seeing it. Story 17. Family works as foster carers. Seeing the neglect these kids endure from their parents is heartbreaking. It makes me question if having a kid should require prior background checks to ensure you are eligible to provide the necessary needs for these children. Some kids come in 2 to 3 years stunted in development due to malnourishment, lack of attention, being left in their cribs all day, void of human interaction and muscle use. They are unable to grow correctly, and this causes lasting impressions on their lives. It's simply sabotage to these innocent children, and yet these parents can have kids that get popped out and scooped up immediately into protective services. Story 18. My ex was a really troubled person. Over time, I learned more and more about their actions. Besides the things they did to me in our relationship, one time in my old apartment late at night, we were making snacks for a movie night. We were laughing and joking, and they started talking about a story involving their brother, an ex of theirs, and them when they were teenagers. The three of them, in their teenage years, found a kitten near their house and put it into a microwave. They tested different times on it, and they described with glee how they started with a few seconds and gradually increased the durations. They recounted how the kitten started walking oddly, and then how the kitten was fatally harmed. They thought it was so funny. I remember being really disturbed by that. I blocked it out almost completely until after we broke up, which ended very poorly, I might add. I literally can't, begin to imagine having the mind of someone who would find joy in such a cruel act. Story 19. Two 15-year-old kids were students of mine. They left my class one day early and didn't return. After leaving, they went to a neighborhood close to the school and broke into someone's home. The homeowner was there, an 83-year-old man with a fragile heart. He either had a heart attack and then fell down the stairs, or he fell down the stairs and then had a heart attack. These boys, who had baby faces, decided to cut his body up, place it into coolers they found at the house, and then took it to the local park and set it on fire. No, little Johnny and Doug will not be at school tomorrow and won't be free to go anywhere until they turn 21. Story 20. The second time Child Protective Services was called on my mother. She threatened to kill me and my siblings rather than let Child Protective Services take us away. Unfortunately, this was said in private, and we were too scared to say anything, so Child Protective Services didn't take us away. Child Protective Services was called on my mother a total of 4 times, I think. There might have been more, and we were never taken away. Story 21. When I was 10, I watched pretty much the whole school chase a boy around the playground because he arrived with a funny haircut. It wasn't funny, he was terrified. But what got me was the teachers who stood in a row, laughing. Yes, Auschwitz, yes, Pol Pot, but this image from my childhood is always the first example of society's cruelty that comes to mind. For teachers to laugh like that. Story 22. A 6-month-old baby girl was brought into the emergency room where I work in full cardiac arrest and died shortly after. The parents wouldn't tell us what happened and even refused to confirm the baby's date of birth or name. Ultimately, police discovered the baby had overdosed on heroin. The fact that the parents were so much more concerned about themselves possibly getting in trouble than their baby girl dying in front of them will stick with me for the rest of my life. Story 23. The dictator in our country is putting people in jail because they are trying to compete against him in the election. The dictator's supporters are happy because he is a strong man. The worst thing is he deteriorated the economy, literally 0% growth last year, but they are okay with that. He is putting activists, bloggers, politicians, and even ordinary people in jail just because they write something against him on Facebook or other platforms. People are ready to kill and put others in jail and abuse other people just because they do not agree with them. Maybe 15% of the population are supporting the dictator after the coup he made 3 years ago. But they are destroying the country very badly. When your country transforms into a dictatorship, you'll see the worst face of the system. I was called to the police because I wrote something against the dictator. Every administration is working for his personal goals. And every word against him is against the country. He will win the elections, and he will lead us another 5 years without hope or opportunity. But his supporters are happy. What is happening is insanely bad. Story 24. Social worker here who has worked in foster care, intensive behavioral health services, partial programs, community mental health. I could go on, but the one case that sticks out to me is when I was working in foster care, and a 13-year-old girl was assigned to me. She had an intellectual disability and functioned more at an 8-year-old level. In her biological home, she and her 4 other siblings would be locked in separate rooms throughout the house. Their father would come home and work his way down the hall, raping each of his children. They would be able to hear one another's cries and screams through the walls and not be able to intervene or comfort one another. Once he was done with each one, he'd leave and lock the door behind him to repeat the same thing the next day. He was eventually caught when my client's younger sibling broke down and told their teacher one day. They were all placed in care but split up as it's difficult to place a sibling group of 5 together. All of them miraculously were about to be adopted around the same time. That is, until my client's first foster mother thought she wasn't thankful or grateful enough for all I do for her. And therefore, she went back into the system. This was all before I met her. When she was placed with her second foster mother is when I met her. And let me tell you, despite everything she'd been through, she was one of my most beloved kiddos who smiled so brightly, laughed loudly, danced confidently. Her ending to all who may want to know. She was eventually adopted, and her adoptive parents got her the Barbie dream house that she always wanted.